Hello guys, in this video I'm going to install the KTM off-road spoke wheel set for the KTM 1290 Super Adventure. This is the front spoke wheel with the gasket rubber and also a rim band to protect the gasket against the spoke ends and a valve with TPMS sensor, which gonna send the tire pressure to the display. Okay, I'm gonna start with the installation of the rim band on the front spoke wheel. There's a hole in the rim band for the tire valve, so make sure this is in the correct position with the hole in the rim. To keep the rim band in position, I put the bolt through the holes, just hand tight. Now that the rim band nicely fits around the spoke wheel, I'm gonna remove the bolt and start with the installation of the gasket rubber. The function of the gasket rubber is to seal off the spoke ends to make it possible to use tubeless tires on these spoke wheels. Before installing the gasket, I rubbed it with a soap and water solution. This makes it more easier to install. Again, I make sure the holes match and put a bolt through to keep it in position. Before starting to put the gasket edges in the grooves, you have to pull the gasket rubber completely around the rim. Once that is done, the fun part can begin. I use the rounded back of a wrench to push the gasket edge in the groove. This makes it more easier instead of using my thumb, and it doesn't scratch the rim. When the gasket is dry, I make it wet again with the water soap solution. And so I work my way around. First one side, then the other, until the gasket is completely in position and I can remove the bolt. Now, so far for the front wheel. Now I'm gonna do exactly the same for the rear spoke wheel. The box contains also a rim band, TPMS sensor and a gasket rubber. The rim band has no hole but only a cutout, so make sure this stays in position when you pull it around the rim. Okay, once that is done, it's time for the gasket rubber. And before I pull it around the rim, I make it wet with the soap solution. Now I use the bolt again to keep it in position. And I can pull the gasket around the rear wheel. Once it lays in position, I can start pushing the seal edges in the grooves. And I keep the gasket wet with the soap solution. To push the edges, I use the wrench again. When both sides are in position, I remove the bolt. So, the rubber gasket fits perfect around the rim. Now I can install the valves. This box contains all the parts for the valve. Here we have the TPMS sensor for the measuring of the tire pressure. This M5 bolt with already some thread lock on and a nut to tighten the valve on the rim, and there's also some thread lock on it. The TPMS sensor and the valve body have both an edge, so they fit only in one position in each other, like this. Okay, I put the sensor on the valve body and I use a soap solution on the sealing rubber of the valve body for better fitment on the gasket rubber. And I positioning it like this, pointing in the other direction than the turning direction of the wheel. Now I tighten it with the nut to the right torque. And the torque values I use are in this video description. So, the valve body is installed on the rim in the right position. Now I'm gonna install the bolt to the TPMS sensor. And here it's very important that you not over tighten this bolt and damage the sensor. So again I use a torque wrench to tighten the bolt to the right torque. Okay, now I'm gonna install the valve core in the valve body, and for that I use this valve core remover tool that fits on the valve and makes it easy to screw the valve core in or out the valve body. I just screw the valve core in the valve body and the valve with TPMS sensor is installed. The only part left is this valve cap. Now I'm gonna do exactly the same to install the valve on the rear spoke wheel. The parts are the same. And I install the TPMS sensor again, pointing backwards against the turning direction of the wheel, like this. Okay, the TPMS sensor on the valve body, and don't forget to lubricate the seal. Placing it on the rim, install the nut and tighten it to the right torque. Install the small bolt on the TPMS sensor and tighten it to the right torque. Now the valve core and the valve cap, and it's done. The valves with TPMS sensor are installed on the front and rear spoke wheel. Okay, now I'm going to the tire central for some off-road tires. The spoke wheels on the back, they're from my mate's BMW GS. Here's my front wheel and my rear wheel with an off-road tire installed. Okay, now I'm gonna start with removing my front wheel and changing the brake discs. I start with removing the ABS sensor, then removing the brake calipers on both sides. Loosen the bolt and loosen the clamp bolts on both sides. Now I can push the front wheel axle out while I'll turn the main bolt out. Now I can pull out the front wheel axle and take the front wheel out. And I keep the spacer aside. So the front wheel is removed and I have it here next to the front spoke wheel. And I'll make sure they lay in the same direction because I want the left brake disc to stay on the left side and the right disc on the right side. Okay, let's start with removing the brake disc bolts. Once that is done, I can remove the brake disc and place it on the spoke wheel. Before installing the bolts, I put some Loctite on every bolt. After placing the bolts, I tighten them evenly in a cross pattern, hand tight, and finally tighten them to the right torque, also in a cross pattern. The first brake disc is installed, and meanwhile someone has sneaked in to examine the Loctite. Okay, now the other brake disc. And I'm gonna put some wooden blocks under the spoke wheel to prevent the brake disc from touching the ground. I remove the other brake disc from the front wheel. Place it on the front spoke wheel and I put the bolts back with some Loctite on them. Again, tighten them evenly and finally to the right torque in a cross pattern. Now the front spoke wheel is ready. With the spoke wheel comes a new spacer, and before placing it, I'm gonna put some grease on the spacer. On the front wheel axle, and on the thread from the axle nut. Now I install the front spoke wheel on the motorcycle. After tightening the front axle bolt, I place the brake calipers back in place, with some Loctite on the bolts. Then the ABS sensor, and finally the axle clamp bolts. And every bolt I tighten to the right torque, like described in the manual. Now the front spoke wheel is installed with an off-road tire on my KTM Adventure bike. And before starting with the rear wheel, I'm gonna drive for a couple of minutes to connect the TPMS sensor from the front tire. When starting, I only have a tire pressure from the rear tire, and after riding for some minutes, the TPMS sensor is connected. Now I have a tire pressure on the screen from my new installed front wheel. Okay, now I can start with changing the rear wheels. First I remove the rear wheel from the motorcycle. Once that is done, I start with removing the brake disc together with the ABS sensor plate. And place it on the rear spoke wheel. Then I put the bolts back with some Loctite on them. And tighten them evenly hand tight in a cross pattern. And to the right torque also crosswise, just like the other brake discs. The rear brake disc is installed. Before placing the rear spoke wheel back, I put some grease on the rear axle and the new spacer. Now the rear spoke wheel is installed, the rear TPMS sensor will automatically connect after a couple of minutes when I ride the bike. Okay, my KTM off-road spoke wheels are installed on my KTM 1290 Super Adventure S. And now he's ready to ride some off-road tracks. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and I hope I see you back.